Tell you what, it's hard sometimes when you know you weren't born, but you kinda have a little dribble coming down your cheek, out the side of your mouth. And dribble makes you feel like a cripple. I want to tell you about it. Let me just turn on the light. Been getting in a lot of arguments lately on Facebook. When you're locked down, you're just gonna attack people. People need to be attacked. They get out of control. They need to be locked down. I must admit, though, it was a rather silly argument, I gotta say. We were talking about whether I was born. Silly thing to argue about, right? Because I'm obviously talking about a mystical experience where I realized I was not born. The fucker was arguing back. I never met the guy. He just showed up like a typical troll on my wall, scavenging for argumentation. I said I had made a post. The post was very simple. I wasn't born. Period. He gets on like a troglodyte, little whippersnapper grasshopper, and decides to undermine and subvert my rather mystical proclamation. That didn't go over so well. No one who subverts me when I say I wasn't born is gonna end well. I wasn't born, but they're gonna die. I said to him I was obviously speaking from an esoteric vantage point that stretched back millennia. And he was like, oh yeah, really? An esoteric vantage point that stretched back for millennia about not being born? I didn't think there was time. How could you have the perspective? It's going back millennia. And then we just got in an all-out Facebook brawl. I find that when I'm in quarantine and I'm locked down, I like to argue with people on Facebook. Raise your hand if you're the same, right? You will just go find someone's wall, you start arguing with them. I know that was the case for me because you get a case of the existential blues and you just gotta go and shit on somebody, right? Especially because of all the times of your life, now is the time where you're really questioning, why am I here? Now, personally, I thought that I had answered that question for myself. Why am I here? Why am I here? Now, I have studied enough philosophy to know that how you frame a question determines much of the response, the answer, the solution to the question. And indeed, the question itself is a frame, and a frame is a frame. So once you get inside of that, it's like a labyrinth, a hall of mirrors, just to speak. And it's one of the reasons why in the great texts of Zen Buddhism, the master just doesn't even answer. The master just sits there in silence and is like, you already fucked yourself up when you posed the question, because you necessitate an answer and all of a sudden you're in the dualistic mind. I think it was the thunderous silence of Vimalakirti in the Vimalakirti Sutra. That was the first time that silence was offered as an answer to the great question. Why? Or who? Or what? How can you negate a question? Use silence. The question itself is born of the separation. It's born of the illusion of the separate self, of the false self, of the egoic construct that's contracted away from the infinitude of being that is its essential and true nature. You may wonder how I came across all this information, this realization, this transcendental knowledge, so to speak, and it's because I was taken to the Vatican as a young man. I was about 22, 23. I had won a prize. It was a lottery. It was in New York. I had gone into one of those delis, and there was a whole array of lottery tickets. And, I was a little bit of a snob when it comes to, when it came to lotteries. I just thought it was for the hoi polloi, the ignorant, the lowlifes. But I bought one because I felt that kind of charge in the moment. I felt something calling me to a particular lottery ticket. When you hear a voice and you can't deny that voice, but it's not like one that you hear with your ears, it's just a knowing. And it fills you. That was the kind of knowing that drew me to the lottery ticket. It was like one of those $5 scratch-offs. And I scratched it off and it says, "You just won a prize to the secret libraries of the Vatican." So you can imagine, I'm there in my early 20s, and I hadn't quite had my spiritual awakening yet, so I was all adrift, suffering from all manners of anomie and malaise and general disenchantment with reality. The next thing you know, I'm in the secret vault of the Vatican Library, surrounded by esoteric texts. All sorts of advanced technologies from extraterrestrial civilizations that had visited the Earth and colonized the Earth and had started all of the advanced civilizations of the past. And I was given a guided tour by a guy in a black cloak. I don't know, maybe he was not a guy. I never saw his face, just two red glowing orbs from under the hood. Tried to strike up some conversation with the guy, but he was like the Grim Reaper, not very talkative. He just pointed. And it was one of those crooked, bony fingers that was 700 years old. It looks like he'd been giving tours to lottery winners for 700 years. And that thing was vast. We're talking a whole underground library that was like 10 miles in that direction, 10 miles in that direction. And the tomes were thousands of years old, at least. And they're falling apart, but I'm sure there's a copy machine somewhere to make faxes and stuff like that. Facsimiles. So they probably had two Vatican libraries, the original and the copies. I was probably in the original, unless, of course, that original was actually a copy of a much earlier original. Who knows, they could have layers and layers and layers and layers and basements and basements and basements of Vatican Library going down to the center of the earth, because it's the hollow earth anyways, obviously. Where do they think they get these fucking 7-year-old Grim Reaper librarians? It's gotta be hollow. Go over there! He didn't even talk, but that's what he would have said. Go over there! Now, of course, not being an ancient linguist, I couldn't read anything. There was nothing written in English. Because books written in English aren't important enough to be in the secret Vatican Library. But if I flipped open this esoteric tome, I saw all these pictograms and hieroglyphs and ritualistic imagery, and I was like, what the fuck? And I knew that this 10 miles of level 1 of the Vatican Underground Library was so full of information and knowledge and practices and perspectives and history and futurology. That my entire sense of reality was nixed immediately. That was like a super lottery ticket, wasn't it? So I had obviously to ask myself a question. I'm sitting there. I'm evidently a relatively smart guy in my early 20s, realizing that none of reality as I had perceived it was legit. I was there in the city of cities, the city that never sleeps, New York City, one moment, and then the next moment, my entire worldview was shattered. And the crazy thing is, because I couldn't read any of these ancient languages like Sumerian or Phoenician or Egyptian or any of that fucking cuneiform shit, I'm like, don't have the answers at all for how to replace my current worldview with something new. I just know my current worldview ain't legit. And in my new worldview, I just got a 7-year-old bony librarian and that's it. That's the one thing. You know, I was brought up to the library through this deep elevator shaft in the Pope's golf cart. Maybe not his golf cart, because I think there's probably about 500 golf carts in the Vatican. Everybody's spinning around and there are all these fake popes in case there's an assassin on a rooftop somewhere and it's going to shoot the Pope. So they've got all these fucking Pope-mobiles, golf carts going everywhere. They're everywhere. It's like those go-karts, right? The go-karts that you used to go at when you were a little kid. And you'd go and you'd bump everybody else. Well, you could just imagine what it was like in the Vatican with 500 popes, pseudo-popes, bumping into each other just to avoid the assassin bullets from the rooftops of the neighboring fucking Italians. So after I made my way through that nonsense, got bumped around every time, I'm like, oh, fuck you, Pope, 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 poked around. Got 500 popes. God knows how old they were. Bony popes. Finally get into the causeway. I've never used that word before. I get into the causeway that takes me to the elevator. And then, like, of course, in Star Trek, you just get in the elevator and go, and all the air pressure leaves the actual elevator shaft, and you just, like, you know, when you used to go to the bank in the drive-through and they had those hydraulic systems and they went, then your money went up and then it went, came down. That was me after I had a lot of nonsense with all the 500 Pope-mobiles. Boom! And then the elevator doors open up and there's Mr. Bony Fingers. Glowing red eyes, at least 700 years old. And as you may have guessed, which would have been a very smart guess, everything is candlelit. The coolest part about the underground, secret Vatican library is the fucking candles. Because they've been burning for thousands of years. So they got this really inventive device where basically you have this massive candle that's probably like 4 feet tall and it's about that thick, super cock, and it's burning and then all the wax goes down and then there's this metal rod that goes around, and I don't know how they do it because of the wax. Something about the wax, something in the wax, but the wax comes down and then goes back up osmotically. There's a causeway, boom, used it twice, and boom, drips back on the top of the candle. And then I realized, because I stared at this thing, I was like, I can't read any of this language, but I can understand this candle. It turns out the metal rod is a special material that's thousands of years old from the Anunnaki, who came from some, neighboring planet. Aliens, obviously. They brought with them, or they fabricated using human slaves that were reptilian human hybrids. I'm not sure exactly because I can't read the texts, but something along those lines. The actual wick is made of a steel nano, I'm guessing it's nano, I don't know. It's Anunnaki, and it's like burning, and then it is in fact the holder of the candle, and it burns and never, ever, ever expires. And so there's like thousands of these things all over. And so while I'm feeling depressed because my entire worldview has been obliterated by these esoteric texts that I cannot read, I'm going around and I'm marveling at these candles, and I'm like whacking the Grim Reaper. I'm like, can you see these things? He only had to light them once, and that's it. They've been burning in this cyclical fashion for thousands of years. So the thing that was really bothering me at the time was like, is there a Rosetta Stone? Right? How can I read these texts? What's the point of winning a lottery ticket to see the secret underground Vatican library that has the entire alternate history of humankind and of the galaxy and possibly the universe, because there's probably 10 floors. You have to get another lottery ticket to get to the other floors of the Vatican secret library. And I'm like, I can't read any of this, but I know that everything that I've ever been taught is necessarily false, because no one knows about this except for a handful of people, and then there's a larger handful that know it exists, right? But it's very select few, and I got a window into it for $5. And I'm like, I can't go back out there. I can't go back out there. I can't live life again like some normal person. That's impossible. Because my whole life I'm going to be wondering what it is that's in this library. Right? What it is. What will you do? Well, I can tell you something. I can just bet that Mr. Grim Reaper librarian here had the same question 700 years ago when he was lighting up the candles for the first time, when he won the equivalent of a lottery ticket 700 years ago, whatever that was. So eventually, imagine you go in there, you see these books, your worldview falls apart. You can't go back to your previous reality. You're like, maybe I'll be a librarian. Maybe I'll spend the rest of my time here, because I could promise you something. Mr. Red Eyes there, he could probably read all these books. He's got the answer. But then, of course, you get into the very, very esoteric meta problem of what do you do with so much knowledge once you know what's going on? And of course, there is millions of books, millions of tomes. Which one of them are right, which are wrong, and which are just kind of mostly right, but also wrong? Which ones are mostly wrong and somewhat right? How can you tell? What is going to be your rubric of interpretation that allows you to establish the veracity of whatever you're reading? Your life becomes about research for the truth. And you end up being this kind of 700-year-old Grim Reaper with the bony fingers and the red eyes, because you're so concerned for the truth that you just never end up getting out and living, because your old worldview has been destroyed, and you got to spend your entire time reconstructing your worldview that no longer makes sense. It's like Fear and Loathing in the secret Vatican library. I have the disease of research now to figure out how to replace the detonated worldview that preceded my entrance into the secret Vatican library, and then I spent my whole life researching, which is now a life that consists of thousands and thousands of years, because eventually I ended up reading the books that allowed me to learn how to extend my life through candles. Now, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm obviously going to have to kill off this librarian who is already dead. who also knows how to do quantum teleportation and move in between various dimensions. It's going to be very difficult. He's got a scythe, I'm sure of it. I don't know where he keeps it, some kind of closet, custodial closet around here. I could probably just go at his head in one fell swoop and become the new librarian. And eventually, 700 years from now, I'll go to that copy machine in the back, get on Adobe Photoshop, print me out a lottery ticket, and quantum teleport to New York City, stick it in that deli for when I need the next librarian to replace me.